Hey everyone, this is going to be a short video on how to plan your time. We're going to start with writing down due dates, just as you might have done in the past, but this is where students often stop and fall short. Simply writing down what's due is different than what you have to do in order to get there, so I'm going to show you step by step how to plan your time so that you can not only schedule for everything you need to do, but so that when done correctly, you'll actually have time to spare. No more frantic scrambling the day before or pulling all-nighters to get things done. You're going to need a weekly calendar worksheet, a planner, and all your due dates, whether they are in Blackboard or the syllabus or both, and you're also going to need something to write with. We'll talk about digital options and other ways you can tailor these techniques and the tips at the end, but for now, we're working with a paper planner and just a pen to write with. Before we get started, let's talk about an effective planner and what the right one should look like. You definitely don't need anything fancy, but you want to be sure it has space to write for each day of the week. That means you want to avoid planners that only have the months. You can also find planners with a lot of space if you avoid those without all of the writing in the margins. These could be inspirational quotes, goals, to-do lists, and so on. These are all important to have, and they can be nice to have in a planner, but be sure they aren't taking up valuable space for what you need it for the most, which is planning around your classes and assignments. Find a good size one, maybe go for one about the size of a notebook. And if you look around, you can also find some with times already laid out for you. You don't need this in a planner necessarily, but the method we're going to learn today does include writing time, so it might be helpful to have. The one you see on the side here is what we're going for, something simple and with a lot of daily writing space. Okay, so jumping into step one. This is the weekly calendar worksheet I was referring to. You can make one or you can find one for free if you just Google it. The idea of the weekly planning worksheet is to only indicate recurring commitments or things that happen every single week without change. Many of us have full course loads of 12 or more credits, but are only required to be in Zoom meetings at a particular time for a couple classes, or maybe just once a week for a class. We want to write down the classes that are synchronous, or anything that requires we be somewhere at a certain time. So maybe we have English every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12:15, psychology every Tuesday, Thursday, and maybe we have tutoring for English right after class every Wednesday. You can also add in work if it's consistent, or even block off any time after 3, because even though your days might change, you'll likely be unavailable after that time. You can also add in getting a sibling off the bus if it's consistent, picking up kids from school or daycare, practice, and so on. Just remember, these are things we're scheduling around as we move forward, so they are things that should be consistent. Once you're finished filling this out, set it to the side and we'll come back to it in a little bit. Next, go through each course one by one. Log into Blackboard and scroll through the announcements, course documents, and the syllabus to figure out the format and to find all of the due dates. You want to be sure to include all due dates, even if they're recurring or consistent. This means discussions especially. If you have discussions in each class that are due every week and then replies that are also due at the end of that week, they need to be written down too. If there are no due dates, but you know there's a final paper due in the last week, write down final paper, maybe using pencil, on the Monday of that week. We'll talk about unclear due dates and reminders next, but either way, you still want to write it down now so that you don't forget. And when you're doing this, don't forget to be consistent with your wording. If something is due, be sure to write the word due at the end. If it's an essay draft due, be sure to write essay draft due rather than just essay or essay draft. This will be important as we start adding other content to your planner, and you'll need to distinguish the difference between writing the essay draft and submitting the essay draft. You'll also want to be sure you're always starting with the class name too, so that at a quick glance you know exactly what you're talking about. So let's talk about unclear due dates for just a minute. Sometimes a professor might say final paper due, details discussed in class, or they'll give you a span of time that you might have a future test. Our suggestion is to write down in the beginning of that week, maybe in pencil, and then choose a date a few weeks before and write a reminder for it. You can say something like email Professor so-and-so about final paper. You can likely assume that the professor will do as they say and talk about it in class, but why not take initiative and ask yourself, especially if it's getting close and you haven't heard anything about it. If they do mention it before you get to your reminder, then you can just simply cross it out. Now that all your due dates are written down for the semester, you want to be sure to add them as they come. For now, find your first due date and ask yourself the two questions you'll always ask yourself when planning. 1, how hard is this going to be? And 2, how long do I need to give myself to do it? It might be helpful to break it down. So if you know that you have a test that is on chapters 1 through 3, then maybe you consider each chapter separately. Chapter 1 was easy, and so was chapter 2, but maybe chapter 3 had concepts you didn't understand, and maybe you didn't do so well on the quiz. So give yourself an hour to study each chapter, but maybe just an extra half hour for that third one. It's up to you, but it's always safer to give yourself more time than you think you'll need. Once you have an amount of time, let's say 3.5 hours, then you need to decide if it's something you can do all in one sitting, or if you need to break it up. 3.5 hours of studying in one sitting is difficult both for time reasons, because we're all busy, and some of us don't have 3.5 hours of uninterrupted time. There's also studies out there that show it's more effective to study in short bursts. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't do all of your studying in one day, but maybe you want to give yourself a half hour between each chapter, so you really need a longer time block to account for that. Either way, step 3 is all about analyzing the assignment and determining how much time you need to complete it. So using that concept, let's look at what a week might look like and let's plan. I've written down all due dates for this week and next week, including discussions, replies, and a test. Taking our first due date, our PY 203 discussion that you see, we want to ask ourselves the two questions. How hard is this going to be and how long do I need? Let's say that you've already done a couple of these and you know it typically involves answering a quick prompt after the chapter reading. Assuming you already did the chapter reading, maybe last week, the question should only take you about half hour to answer. Let's give ourselves an hour, and let's say you can do it all in one sitting. We want to try avoiding the day before whenever we can to account for something that comes up unexpectedly. So let's count back one day and then add a day, and we land on Monday. Now we want to refer to that sheet we filled out in the beginning. What did I have on Monday? Looks like the only time obligation I have is at 12:15 for class. I know I work best in the morning, so let's write down a time and a task to match that. Let's do 10 a.m., and we know we're going to be writing the discussion. Writing the time is helpful, and you'll see why as we start to fill our planner. We can do the same for the next due date, which is Sunday, and it's for the same class. We need to reply to our peers. According to my weekly worksheet, Friday is the same schedule as Monday, so let's stick it at 10 a.m. and give ourselves an hour. Putting it here means 1, we don't have to do it on the weekend, and 2, we'll have a day to spare if we follow our schedule. Now, if this is recurring every week and it seems to work for you, try to keep it this way. This way you know every Monday and Friday at 10 are dedicated to your psychology discussions. The more you can make this into a habit, the more structure you'll have for yourself. Let's add the same information for the following week since we know discussions are a weekly commitment. There's Monday, and before we add it to Friday, let's be sure it won't interfere with whatever this due date is. We have a test, and we have to do it by midnight. I'm going to choose to reply to the post as usual because I know it won't take long and it's fairly easy work. So let's add it to Friday. By doing what we just did, we made sure that we had a time and day carved out to complete 4 different assignments, the 2 posts and the 2 replies. Let's look at our last due date here, which is the HI 101 test. After analyzing it and asking myself those 2 questions, I determined this is going to be fairly easy for me because it's on the first 3 chapters and it was still pretty introductory material. I'll give myself an hour for each chapter, but I'm going to split it up over 3 days. Now remember, we count backwards, not starting the day before, but 2 days before. Another way to do this is just to add an extra day. So we'll count back 1, 2, 3, and add an extra day to land on Monday. Let's schedule some times and tasks working with both our weekly planning worksheet and what we've already scheduled on our planner here. Starting with our first day, Monday, we have to do our discussion, and I know I have class at 12:15. We can schedule 1 hour of study time before 10, in between our discussion in class, or after class. Let's go with after class at 1:30, and that'll give us time for lunch in between. Now, I've left class times and weekly commitments out of this planner, and I'm just referring to my weekly planning worksheet for space reasons. But of course, you can add them in if you think it might help you with scheduling. So let's add our study time, and then let's add lunch in between. It might seem foolish to schedule lunch in there, but without it, it looks like you have free time. And the whole idea of creating structure is to know exactly what you're doing and at what time so that you can build off it and stick with it. You can still schedule lunch and free time, but it helps you to put other things around it into context. And you can see here why it's important to choose a planner with a lot of space. So let's do the same for the other 2 study days. Looking at Tuesday, we have a commitment, which is class at 9:05. So let's schedule right after at 11. And on Wednesday, we have class at 12:15, just like Monday, but this time we have tutoring right after. So let's get Tuesday on there. And for Wednesday, let's schedule study time before with lunch in between, just like we did for Monday. Now we've put in our 3 hours of studying and we have a day left. Usually this is a great time to visit with tutors and do review, and as I mentioned before, this is a good cushion to have in case anything unexpected pops up. Let's add that on Thursday, working around our 9:05 class, and let's give ourselves another hour to review. Now this is a fairly simple schedule. We know there's going to be weeks where there's plenty more going on. Maybe you had to work Wednesday morning, or maybe you had to work Wednesday morning and didn't find out until Monday after you already made this. That's why it's really important to give yourself that extra day. Or if after you've counted the 3 days back, you realize you can go further and maybe start the weekend before on Saturday or Sunday. This would have meant that you had 3 hours of studying, 1 hour review, and you still have 2 or 3 days to spare. This is also great because as of now, you can see what days are packed and which days are open. So if you have a friend reach out to go out to lunch, you can say something like, next week is super busy, but I have Tuesday and Thursday wide open this week. And you can even add that in if you like. All right, so that was a lot of information. You'll continue to work through each due date you wrote down and plan just like we did week after week, and before you know it, you'll have an everyday schedule that even though you have a bunch to do, you'll feel good about it because it's nothing you have to remember. It's all written down for you. Let's talk about tips and tricks you can do so that visually this looks really nice and it reads a little easier. One thing you can do when you start is to label each new week as week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on, right at the top of your planner. There are some professors out there who label their syllabus according to weeks, and while it might be easy in the beginning, when it's only a couple weeks in, when you get to week 10, you're going to be like, wait, what dates are for week 10? And it can make planning ahead really difficult. So for example, if you're filling out your planner with due dates and it says you have a test in week 7, how do you know what dates those are without counting through the weeks starting at 1? So that's something to consider. I've also seen professors label their content in units. You can use one or the other or both labels depending on what your classes are like for the semester. You can use highlighters and colored pens. A popular method I've seen work for students is to simply highlight things that are due. If you remember on the last slide, there were some days with multiple tasks, so by highlighting tests only or due dates only, you can quickly draw your eye to important tasks. You can also use a different highlighter or colored pen for each class. This is really popular for those who are itching to use the monthly part of their calendar, or for those who really enjoy seeing a few weeks at a time. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You can highlight days with tests in yellow, days with papers due in pink, work days or other consistent commitments in blue, and maybe tutoring days in orange, and so on. If you use little dots like I did, then you can see if you have multiple commitments in one day. You can also use the monthly to add your work schedule or other personal appointments, or if you choose to assign each class a color, then you can quickly see what classes have something due at a glance. You might also choose to get rid of the weekly planning sheet you filled out in the beginning and just write your weekly commitments each month, either at the top of the calendar or every day that you have them. However you choose to do this, just make sure it works for you And if you do choose to use color, don't forget a key at the top. Other tips and tricks include keeping your weekly planning worksheet folded up right in the front of your planner, or using it as a bookmark so that you can refer to it until you get used to your schedule. We talked about unclear due dates in the beginning of this video, so don't forget to write reminders to email each professor as needs arise, or ask about unclear due dates during office hours. If you know you're going to have a final exam in May, and you know it's the last week of class, either Tuesday or Thursday when you have that class, then maybe you can write a reminder in mid-April to email your professor about the final date. You can use sticky notes for to-do lists, like call for med refill, or if you run out of room. When you're filling out your weekly planning worksheet, or when you're thinking of time to do a task, don't forget commute time. If you have class on campus at 12 and it takes you a half hour to get here, then you really shouldn't be scheduling anything close to when you need to leave. Obsess over using your planner and scheduling your time. Search hashtags like planner hacks and academic planners to find different ways to use yours and to get inspiration. From there, you'll find like-minded people you can follow. We all know we sort of become what our news feeds are, so take this opportunity to switch yours up and really perfect the skill of planning. It'll definitely come in handy even once you're done with school. You can save money by making your own. Get a binder and then go to Google and search printable academic planner sheet or free weekly sheets and click and create one that works for you. You can also save money by using an app. There are calendar and reminder apps that come right on your phone, but you can also use something like Google Calendar to help you organize. Using an app uses the same concepts we learned, only it's digital. And lastly, but definitely not least, you want to check your planner every single day. This may sound like common sense, but you'd be surprised how many students want to be organized, go through this entire effort, and then leave it in their car or the bottom of their bag. You should be checking it every day, not only for what you need to do for that day, but for what's coming up, and also to write in it as things arise. We've offered a lot of information today in an effort to be thorough, but we know it can be a lot, and we know it can be confusing sometimes when you don't have someone in front of you to ask questions. So take your time with this and watch the video multiple times. The benefit of having this recording is that you can start and stop throughout and follow along as you do it yourself. This is a lot of work, and it can feel like something you can put off because studying, working, doing homework, and going to class take priority. But if you just take your time to just get started, you'll find the bulk of the work is right at the start. And once you do it, maintaining it is easy, and it can even be satisfying. You can check things off as you go, and you have a visual of how much you've actually completed. For more information like this, continue to follow us on HawkLife. And if you're a student with a documented disability, or if you have questions about your eligibility with our office, please reach out using one of the methods you see on the screen. Thanks for tuning in.